One, and go. CO makes a simple point, yet a round winning point. The Evangelical Church does a lot of good in helping people. On our side, you get that inherently more. On their side, you get that inherently less. It's really not that complicated. It's not just about belief, radicalization, legitimacy, and all of these fancy words that all of the teams in this round talk about in concept, practical, and spiritual less on their side of the house. There are two main topics to discuss in this debate. The first issue is on relevancy and legitimacy. On which side is the evangelical church able to get its message heard, seen on a deeper and more on a better basis? And secondly, is on the extent of effect. Once we actually do, where are we able to make the most good in this world based on the interests that the evangelical church wants? First issue on relevancy. The first thing I want to break and dismantle is opening government's line of logic. Prime Minister says the church is filled with conservatives, the US is very divided. Since it's divided, the church won't any more members because no one wants to listen anymore because they're seen as crazy conservatives and that they'll choose other options like Islam or atheism. I have a lot of A. It presumes that the evangelical church is a monolith and that everyone in the evangelical church is predominantly conservative. This is just false. PM himself says this debate is about all of the denominations in the Christian religion in the United States, meaning that this isn't just about the one or two major denominations of the evangelical church, because there isn't in the evangelical church. It's comprised of regional groups that don't have one clear major head. What this means is that the evangelists in America operate on an incredibly wide margin and spectrum, uniquely characterized in extent. Important because it directly put on dissent, on radicalization, on people not being able to change their minds, because many of these churches exist in America. There is no central evangelist movement in America. Church, right? You have many options. You do not believe DPM's assertion. B. The second problem I have is that it presumes that this is something that only happens on side opposition. And look, right? Opening opposition points out how opening government doesn't have a counterfactual as early as LO. They had all of DPM to construct it. CG also could have probably mechanized it. They didn't, so this is on them. What they are saying, as to what Joseph has said, applies equally, if not worse, to them. If the evangelists did not be active in so prominent, recognizable in US politics, that means that they'll be inherently less forgotten, and others will turn alternatives on Gov's side of the house because those are more proxies. DPM actually concedes to this when he says religion is already such a hard thing to believe in the average person's life right now. So if you didn't have a way of interacting with them, you probably won't ever interact with them on their side of the house even further. The second thing I want to do is to flip closing government. CG says it's confusing, or it confuses how people interact with politics and religion now that the evangelical church is there. First, I would argue this fits within the interests of the evangelists as an actor. They want people to act in line with the evangelists want, so this point actually proves a benefit that can exist on side opposition. But B, right? But secondly, similar to the problems posited by opening government, I think government bench's scope and scale is completely misaligned to what actually exists in reality. Because they assume that the evangelical church has the aim of converting every single Christian on earth and that they should care about the opinions of everyone that's not within their congregation. I think the far more reasonable and realistic interest of these churches is that they are interested in the local area and state in which they exist in. People from outside of the country criticize them, even if people in social media criticizes them, right? Why should they give a shit when their local community still build ops in and incentive them? That is how they compete with Catholicism. That is how they stay in power. This is me explaining why legitimacy is on our side of the house. Because it's far small scale issue that you recognize that exists within the United States instead of the large scale burden that CG seems to misunderstand what this debate is about. The third and last thing I want to do in this specific issue is to outweigh the 800 things we heard from opening opposition. And hey, I'm not trying to knife them, right? But where I think their biggest weakness lies is in actually having a clear path to victory towards what the actual interest and end goal of Evangelical Church actually is. I think Joseph is great at explaining this point. The Evangelical Church is comprised of a congregation of people who deal with these politics on a day-to-day basis. They'll feel a lot more comforted knowing what these pastors whose spiritual formation they depend on gets helped in the proper way that they need. It's just proximately more important to them. Go POI.
So if you concede that you don't get actually new members, church dies in 15 years,
I don't understand the church will automatically die after 15 years. It's like, I mean, come on, have some reasonability, right? Second issue, really quickly. On the extent of effect, this debate has been way too perception, legitimacy, and topics that are way too above the scope of what this debate can be about. What Joseph quite simply points out is outcome backlash of any negative perception. The existence of evangelical churches has led to projects, initiatives, and experiences that believe in something above them and become assimilated into a community which they feel comfort in. Responding actually to the POI, right? It's not like they'll automatically lose all of their members just because they die out. Those children will have their own children. It's a self-sustaining cycle of all of these evangelical movements. This is exclusive only on side closing opposition because it is only on our side where you get the mechanisms that Joseph talks about when it comes to proximity, when it comes to care, when it comes to the ability for people to actually listen to them. Look, GovBench have put themselves into a hole they cannot crawl out of. You cannot say that the people won't without giving an answer as to what will actually convince people to believe in the church. For all of those reasons, very, very proud to oppose.